Today our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you, good night, and God bless America.
Good afternoon. I am Chief Master Sergeant Randy Anderson, U.S. Air Force retired, former Air Commando, and the moderator for today's SOF Stories. Topic 1, the aftermath of 9/11. Thank you for joining us. Throughout this series, we will explore former campaigns and operations, focusing solely on the historical context of Special Operations involvement from an operational and/or tactical perspective. Each month, over the next several months, SOF Stories Live will invite guest panels composed of former special operators, represented from every service branch of U.S. SOCOM. All panel members are former special operators who have served at the operationally deployed level. We will choose them specifically for their personal involvement in special operations as officers and enlisted. This venue will give them a unique opportunity to share with you, the audience, their insights and unbiased experiences from their personal point of view. Some of it widely documented in publications and cinema, some of it not. This month marks the anniversary of the tragic events surrounding 9/11 and the Special Operations response in the immediate aftermath of the Air Force Special Operations Command point of view. Today, we're pleased to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished panel, consisting of former AFSOC Special Operators Major General U.S. Air Force retired, Mike Kingsley, Command Chief Master Sergeant, U.S. SOCOM Senior Enlisted Advisor Greg Smith, and Colonel U.S. Air Force retired Matt Atkins. Gentlemen, welcome to SOF Stories Live. Thank you for attending. Let's start with introducing General Kingsley. General Kingsley, briefly tell us your rank and title in the immediate aftermath of 9/11.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Randy, and the Global SOF Foundation for the invitation for this event today, and the inaugural invitation here. My rank at the time, I was a lieutenant colonel. I had just taken command in February of that year of the 20th Special Operations Squadron from Tom Trask, and my DO was a guy named Brad Webb. Command
Chief Smith, would you please give a brief intro of who you were and what your rank and title was in the aftermath of 9/11?
Well, Randy, to echo General Kingsley's comments again, thanks for the opportunity to be here and to kind of share and reflect on these experiences with you and the larger audience. Again, Greg Smith, at the time, a career AC-130 gunner. At the time on 9/11, I was a tech sergeant, E6, and I was the superintendent of wing strategic plans. And I had just returned from other activities in the Middle East. I had been up at wing plans about 2 years at this point, and I had literally just been home about a week and a half right before the terrorist attacks.
Excellent. Thank you, Chief Smith. Colonel Atkins, welcome to SOF Stories Live. Tell me your title and rank at the time when you got word of the aftermath of 9/11.
Yes, indeed. And I'll echo the sentiments from the previous gentleman. This is a fantastic honor, and I'm looking forward to it. I was a brand new captain at the time at the 20th Special Operations Squadron at Hurlburt Field. And I was Lieutenant Colonel Kingsley's intel flunky at that point, and had been with AFSOC for about 2.5 years.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. For the panel, please explain the circumstances of what you were doing when you actually received the notification, the flow of communications, because there was quite a significant amount of communications flowing from the top down and the top up. It was almost a comedy of errors, but tell me your responses, your emotional response, and how you geared up mentally to do that. Chief Smith, we'll start with you on this one because you had quite a bit going at the time, as you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, thanks, Randy, for that. So on the morning of September 11th, I had the Norwegian Special Operations Forces had a team at Hurlburt Field, and we had just spent the last couple nights out on the range doing close air support and gunnery work, as well as some escort stuff, and had a late night. As you can imagine, those Vikings can tend to stay up late, and so after we'd finished a night of close air support, got to bed about 4 o'clock in the morning, after putting gear away and reflecting on the night's events. And about 9 o'clock, my phone rang and said, "Hey, you need to get up just after 9." I was in a fog, and I woke up just in time to see the second airplane hit the tower. Immediately tried to process what was happening. You know, this absolute mortified feeling in your stomach and a state of disbelief as I quickly got dressed and drove to Hurlburt Field. By the time I got there, there was a Bradley fighting vehicle out front. The gates had been basically locked down, and we just didn't know what was happening. So that was kind of up to the point where I got to work to start to process what was happening. I'll stop there to kind of, and I'll add on when General Kingsley's.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Chief. General Kingsley, you had quite a bit on your plate as a 20 commander, probably, in fact, more than ever in the history of your own predecessors. You didn't just have to worry about mobilizing or saddling up to potential ops in Afghanistan. Tell me your story.
Okay, first of all, we had in our squadron a number of helicopters that were on training exercises at the time. We had some helicopters in Louisiana. We had 2 helicopters that are up at Asheville for the mountain training. And we had 3 helicopters that General Webb was heading up when they were at Fort Bragg. I was participating in a morning professional development exercise, literally on the paintball field. They were inaugurating the paintball field over there at Hurlburt Field. And so all the wing leadership and the command chiefs and first sergeants were out there, playing paintball. So we all got our notifications on our beepers at the exact same time. And we all ended up going back to our squadron to figure out what's going on, who do we notify, what kind of deployed ops, where are people, those type of things when I was a squadron commander.
Interesting. Thank you, General Kingsley. Matt, you were clearly the intel officer, and General Kingsley, at the time, Lieutenant Colonel Kingsley had to really depend on what you were being told and what his course's options were, or his course of actions were. Tell me your experiences once you got notified up through the intel channels, what was happening.
Yeah, sure, Ray. Well, first of all, I've been saying it was bin Laden for years. Just putting that on the record. No, I'm kidding. That's complete horse hockey. But as Colonel Kingsley alluded to, I was a part of the 4-ship of Pablos that was flying at JRTC in support of a bilat. And we're all sitting on the aircraft on the ramp at NAS New Orleans getting ready to fly when one of the flight engineers came running out of the hooch saying, "Holy cow, turn the helicopters around." And we realized we got back to the talk in time to see the second plane hit the tower. So immediately, we went and hunkered down in our hotel room like all good Americans did for a 24-hour period. And then we started the process of trying to get back to Hurlburt, retreat to the mothership, at which point I locked myself in the skiff for about 9 days trying to figure out what was going on and try to support Colonel Kingsley and the wing as we geared up to go to war. It was a pretty amazing time.
Yes, absolutely. General Kingsley, you were told, you got your orders, but basically your orders were threefold. Yes, you had to potentially set up a CSAR force for deployment to Afghanistan. However, there were events not only to support the World Trade Center, but at the Pentagon as well. Would you elaborate on that?
Yeah, you're right. We divided ourselves up into kind of planning cells. First of all, planning cells for the initial response to the disaster sites. So we looked at the airplanes that we had available, and to say the least, the best airplanes available were already deployed. We had 2 at Asheville, and we had 3 at Fort Bragg. So the best plan was I called up Brad Webb and I said, hey, Brad, let's get you going, get the crews going and get you guys in the direction of the disaster site in New York. Obviously, there's no air base close, and so that we were targeting McGuire Air Force Base. And but needless to say, the airspace was shut down. So when the airplanes took off, Brad Webb and the crews, they were a little worried about being intercepted by fighters, to be honest. And they said, honestly, it was very eerie to see no airplanes in the air at any time during their flight up to McGuire Air Force Base. At the same time, I also received a phone call from, I didn't receive it, but our command post received a phone call from the curator for the USS Intrepid. What he offered was just real selfless sacrifice. He said that at the time that he had a number of static display airplanes that he was willing to bring the elevator down, put those airplanes below deck so we could land the payloads on the deck of the US Intrepid. And just one last comment, inside the squadron, obviously we needed to inform people of what was going on. And my wife had scheduled a wives meeting for that Thursday. So 9/11 was on a Tuesday. That Thursday, we ended up having that meeting. And I stood in front of everybody and tried to help them understand. But the night before, I told my wife, things are going to suck. We're not going to be able to have communications for a while and that kind of thing. So what did she relay to the wives? Well, things are going to suck for a while.
Yeah, way to go, Miss Sharon. I know Sharon Kingsley personally, so I can only imagine that conversation. Chief Smith, you were the actual tasked as the plans officer. Even though you're an NCO, you're being treated as the officer because actually you had the most experience. On around 21 September, you were told to accompany, you along with Colonel Atkins, to accompany Colonel Kingsley, that you were headed to the Middle East. Would you tell me a little about the challenges you faced on your initial deployment and your arrival to Masira, and the circumstances from your recollection, eventually winding up in JBAD and some of the challenges you face?
Yeah, so I'll back up just a hair very briefly. It was about the 12th of September. We had worked 24 straight hours at this point once we got into work, and everything was very, very compartmented and trying to figure out what was going on. We had pretty good actionable intelligence to start planning on. And then Colonel Kisner looked over at me and said, hey, weren't you just over there? And I was like, yes, sir, as I had offered some thoughts on some of the potential staging areas. And he's like, good, go back. And I just kind of like stopped in my tracks, because, okay, let me try to figure this one out. So that's how I wound up on the initial tranche. And as we went out, the original operation name was called Operation Infinite Justice. Very few people know this, right? But I know then Colonel Kingsley and Captain Atkins and our group, our orders were originally under the auspices of Operation Infinite Justice. Once they realized how offensive the term would be when translated and all this, and assuming forever, it was changed to Enduring Freedom. So a little tidbit of info that most people don't know is Enduring Freedom was originally Infinite Justice. Wow. So we deployed out on a C-17 and landed in Masira, Oman. And Colonel Kingsley said at the time, Tech Sergeant Smith, he said, okay, find us a place to work, and that's where we're at. So we got off the C-17, and there were a bunch of Omanis sitting in a couple of gun trucks, right? And they didn't know what we were doing there. We didn't know. We're like, are we going to get gunned down at the time? It was just so alien. Everything was just alien at the time. So I did what I did. I went up and marhaba kef halak, and started a little bit of Arabic with them, and then worked our way to the point where what would become the dining facility. Really, it was about setting up the logistics to allow Colonel Kingsley and Captain Atkins and their teams to get to work. My job was really to build the jock and the talk so the decision makers could do what they were going to do. So we found the dying corps guys who were responsible for kind of all the bed down stuff, the warehouse. And so we walked into the dining facility and there were just a bunch of cots. So we had several females on our crew. So we stacked all the cots sideways and built a wall and told our female teammates, hey, there's your private area, right? There were no showers at the time or anything else. It was just, it was pretty rudimentary. And then we acquired, I guess a good way to put it, at Harvest Falcon kits. And I'll tell you why. Because I didn't know tent city and generator and power standing up a bare bones base. Well, we were the first people, Onyx and all kind of, I said, give me 2 of those and 4 of those. And we just started wheeling stuff out. You know, Colonel Kingsley had given me orders, and by golly, that's what we were doing. So we pulled a bunch of stuff out. By the way, I learned a lot about generators and powers because when the Red Horse guys showed up about a week later, I was a hunted man because I had completely ruined the entire production facility. But we had great power in our ops center because we took 100 kilowatt, what's called a 100 kW generator, and we hooked it in. Captain Atkins had a temporary skiff set up that was probably 30 degrees inside of it because we had such good cold air blowing in it because we just overpowered the crap out of our ops center. Our tent cities were built too close together because we didn't know anything. It was a bunch of AFSOC bubbas just trying to make it work. So we just set up our tents. We set up what we thought was right, and then the Red Horse guys came in behind us and fixed it all after we had already left.
I'd like for Matt to interject in that because Matt, you had to set up a skip operation essentially for intel flow at Masira, and then we'll talk about actually getting to Jacobabad and the circumstance you had for getting a skiff in operations there. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. I'll pick up the thread from Greg. So, yeah, I remember when we landed at Masira, you know, the same gun trucks, the same Omanis, the suspicious scowls, and coincidentally, on the other side of the base, there was a British and Dutch contingent there for an F-16 exercise. So I found the British intel guy, and he and I got in a truck and drove around the base and decided, well, we're going to be kind of safe. And then shortly thereafter started stealing parts to create the aforementioned 30-degree skiff. Oman was definitely a bizarre Twilight Zone land, but immediately we started planning for the next phase, and that was how are we going to get to Pakistan? Because as General Kingsley alluded to, we were going to go somewhere in Pakistan and set up what was ostensibly going to be billed as a CSAR alert force. So we ended up hitching a ride on the USS Peleliu, which was, you know, full of an entire Marine rifle regiment that was steaming around the Indian Ocean. So they headed on down, and we moved all 8 Pavlos, and the Jasodif embarked and steamed off the coast of Pakistan until it was time to move on in. And just a whole, you know, there's about 7 hours of war stories right there. But one of my favorite moments of that movement was we were embarked on the Peleliu and headed into our final station of Jacobabad. And so we all took off and were headed in, and somehow we got our wires crossed, and aerial refueling C-130s were late. And we didn't have enough gas to make it. So we decided to set down in Baluchistan in a big flat spot, which turned out to be a military installation. And sure enough, eight giant helicopters in the middle of the desert, and a gun truck comes bounding on over, and happened to be in then Colonel Kingsley's airplane. He's like, "Hey, Matt, intel guy, you're dispensable. Go talk to him." Holy expletive. So I, you know, I take off all my guns and everything so I don't look threatening, you know, because I'm a whopping 5'6", you know, an angry leprechaun. And I go bounding across, and I can see the Pakis have their 50 cal trained on me. And I look behind me, and every gunner on every Pavlo has got, you know, the 50 cals and the miniguns all pointing at me. And I'm like, this is not going to end well for the short kid. And of course, there were a couple of PJs behind, you know, because if I got shot, at least one of them's going to get an air medal for putting me back together. But ultimately, the Pakistanis in perfect English explained that we really shouldn't be parking there. And I explained we'd be leaving shortly, and we were on a peaceful mission and all that hoo-ha. So shortly thereafter, we got the radio call, hey, the AR track is getting set up, and I literally ran back to the helicopters. We took off and then landed at Jacobabad to start the next chapter. But that was a recurring trend. General Kingsley had a great knack for, hey, you go out and talk to the hostiles and see how that works out for you. So with that, I'll kick it over to General Kingsley.
General Kingsley, yes, please do elaborate. I can tell you from Colonel Atkins, perspective, that was 100% true. If there was trouble, we would get it and then bring you the trouble back. But go ahead and elaborate.
Well, just a little bit about Messir Island. Obviously, there was an exercise, just like Chief Smith said, about with the Brits, and we got to be good friends with the Brits there, and so kind of a coalition building already starting. I got to know the Omani base commander as well. His name was Colonel Maktoon. He didn't really feel comfortable with us being there, but understood exactly why. They had a training base for themselves, and they were doing constant flights around the pattern on the island. The other thing that we had there was a U.S. contingent of a couple P3s. And that was a very small detachment with a small little command post, but that was vital at the time. U.S. SOCOM's communications capability is so much better now with all the tactical deployable comms. At that time, we had very, very few secure comms, and so we ended up using the P3 detachment STU-3 at the time to be able to contact our higher headquarters. So my primary contact was with the KAOC, and they're very interested in us getting forward so that we can start the war with the CSAR force in place. So my primary contact was a guy named Paul Harmon. He was the liaison officer in the KAOC in Al Udeid, Qatar. And I ended up calling him constantly every day, trying to get information to and from on what our capabilities are. In the meantime, we're building up the airplanes.
Thank you, General Kingsley. One question I would ask of you in retrospect, after we began to respond, and we're going to press ahead and fast forward to combat operations that actually occurred around the 8th of October and some other circumstances. But the 20th Special Operations Payville community had already been supporting combat operations significantly, like much of AFSOC, and the equipment was worn, and there was a lot of challenges, not just for the maintenance, but for equipping the air crews with the necessary things. After 7 years of Bosnia and culminating with Allied force, here we are, a brand new operation. Would you like to elaborate on how you navigated those challenges?
Well, just in short, I would say that a lot of the capabilities were somewhat immature in some ways. You know, we were lacking some of the needed items for the deployments. But I will also say, on the other hand, the wing had just gone through an ORI, a pretty substantial ORI, of which I give credit to the wing leadership at that time, that they were preparing us for something like this. And so just coming off that ORI and having the idea that we were literally living in tents at Herbert Field in the path, and I know many people remember that, but that gave us a little bit of an up on the idea about deploying here and living in the squalid conditions that we ended up living in. Needless to say, it was worse than we expected, but we were starting to get prepared because of the ORI.
Yes, operational readiness inspections were challenging. Some people found it amusing that these inspections would actually go on while we're actually conducting combat operations, and we would still have to support those. Let's fast forward, gentlemen, to the events the 8th of October. I'd like, we're at JPAD. Chief Smith's got the talk up and running. Intel flow is starting, and we're making our Intel officers comfortable with air conditioning so they can give us better service. What was the Intel situation of the flow? What were the contradictions there, Colonel Atkins?
Well, to clarify, it's not to make us comfortable. It's because all our nerd gear throws out so much heat. So regardless of how you slice it, skips are never a fun place to work and operate. Our intel flow was crippled largely in the beginning because of, as General Kingsley alluded to, the lack of tactical and deployable comms. But we quickly, adapted, improvised, and overcome. And by the time we were getting ready for combat operations, we had pretty robust SIPRNet connections with some of the fielded forces and some of our adjacent units. We were scouring the newspapers as best we could. I had a daily tea with the Pakistanis, Air Marshal Tanweer, one of General Kingsley's best friends, as well as some of the Pakistani special services groups, and ISI guys that would swing by. So we were beginning to develop an informal intelligence network that actually provided a lot more than the record message traffic. As the days went by, we got our SCI capability. We began to get the national feeds, but really this was a very tactical and human-based war, and it would, carry that way out for the vast preponderance of our operations out of Pakistan.
Thank you, Colonel Atkins. I really appreciate that. Chief Smith, what would you like to add to that? I can see by the body reaction that it's like, oh yeah, I got something to say about that. Go ahead.
There's hours into themselves on the Pakistan adventures, right? But I will just say, as Colonel Kingsley and the team embarked on the Peleliu, we were leapfrogging, so I leapfrogged up to Jacobabad to get that ready, and I remember them telling me, "Hey,
I think he's got government bandwidth problems."
It was full of screech owls. The hangar, I guess we'll sweep and clean up. So and built a side wall in the jock. It's all we could do to separate that area to kind of make it where you could, process humans and some of those other pieces. It was so rudimentary. And then we set up cots in the middle of the hangar, which was just, so we had 400 people on cots. The 8th SOS, our MC-130 Echoes were there with us as well. So we ended up with a MC-130E at the time, would eventually swap with the Shadows a little bit later. But at the time we had the MC-130Es and the MH-53 show up there to Jacobabad, and man, we thought we were on the frontier. Now, one very quick story is there started to be a protest out just outside the base. You could hear kind of chanting, if you will, and a burning tire would fly over the outer perimeter or whatever. And General Kingsley had to, sir, what do you want to do? Do we bug out? I mean, because all the human we were getting is, this is Al-Qaeda, man. They're coming over the wire at us, right? We thought we were compromised. It was just amazing looking back at how realistic this felt as we were out there. I mean, this is Dances with Wolves stuff. I mean, we were out at Fort Hancock there, on the frontier, and we were completely surrounded in our minds. But somehow we didn't get invaded, other than the amount of raw sewage that came up from the ground below us. I think that invaded us. We created a new place called Lake Jacobabad, which was really the raw sewage that could not handle 400 people, which created its own health problems and hazards out there that every day we were either working with comm, intel, external factors or humanitarian factors while we were trying to get the daily tasking order and figure out how this whole war or this whole conflict was going to happen. So I'll stop there for purposes of this.
I'll tag team on that one real quick. And as the intel officer, I realized very quickly we have met the enemy, and the enemy is fecal matter. As Greg alluded to, the Pakistani pipes are only about that big, and they were not designed to accommodate toilet paper. So when you have a JSOTF with 400 people on MREs, it backed up and would flood the jock. And so much so we made the joint staff slides because 50% of the camp was down with a unique disease called folliculitis. And if you Google that one, you don't want to hit images because it's a disease you get from prolonged exposure to fecal matter. So we set a world record for breaking a harvest falcon as far as how fast you can fill the shitter tent. So in the initial days, the real enemy was health and welfare, but amazingly enough, and we had a SEAL platoon show up as well as part of the CSAR task force. So it kind of evolved into a Star Wars cantina of really strange people showing up, SAS guys driving on the base in their Land Rovers, they who shall not be named, the OGAs, showing up in bucket loads, and Then Lieutenant Colonel Kingsley really became the mayor of Mos Eisley, and it was an extremely strange situation. So I'll throw it back with that.
One quick add on this is, you know, as the sewage was backing up, I decided to take a picture of it and send it back to our headquarters. So I took a picture of raw sewage and I sent it back to our headquarters, and I put literally, check out this, in quotes, shit, right? So check out this shit. And I had mistakenly sent it to the CFAC J4. So I had sent it to the wrong email address. So I sent it to the 2-star, you know, back at, sorry, to the CENTCOM J4. I had sent it to the CENTCOM J4. And when I realized it, I tried to recall the email, and I just thought, well, it was a good career while I had it. So I had to go tell Colonel Kingsley that I just emailed the 2-star pictures of our fecal matter. Needless to say, the next day, a bunch of mop buckets and cleaning supplies started showing up from CENTCOM, who realized the dire straits that we were in. So I'll stop there. Over to you, General Kingsley.
Just to pull on that a little bit further, CENTCOM tasked CENTAF to help us out. And so we actually had a person named Heather Buno, a major at the time, and Heather came to Jacobabad, left in about a day or two because she just could not believe what we were living through. But that was okay. She ended up coming back with a major plan to build a leach field for that area. And I learned a lot about how CE and our logistics infrastructure, particularly from the larger Air Force, was able to support the building up of a base. And in essence, this was a predecessor to CRGs that we have today that literally build up bases in the long run. And oh, by the way, Heather Buno ended up becoming a colonel later on in life, and was the logistics commander at Cannon Air Force Base. Oh, by the way.
No.
So another point of matter, though, was on the day that we arrived at Jacobabad, I was called on a sat phone by Paul Harmon in the KAOC, and he says, "Has your helicopters arrived?" And literally, they arrived the 7th and the 8th of October, and I said, "Yes, they've arrived." "Okay, we're going to start the war." Literally, the day they arrived, we were going to start, and we had CSAR in place. Problem was, our higher headquarters in the Jasota wasn't set up yet at Karzai. They were on the way. Kisner was delayed due to airlift issues and other issues. Karzai was getting set up with General Mulholland. So we were really kind of on our own for a little period of time until they caught up and got themselves up there at Karzai. And one last point is my relationship with Air Commodore Tonwer. I met him on the ramp, really nice guy. He was very concerned because once again, they were doing primary training there at Jacobabad for their Air Force. The Pakistanis weren't necessarily very happy with the United States at that time because we had promised them a sale of F-16s, say 10 years ago, and then something went wrong with that sale. So in essence, our building relationships was paramount at that time. He also wanted to ensure that we weren't going to bother his operations or impinge on the local town in any way. So that's why we ended up having to build our own leach fields. We could not insert any of our waste products or anything else into the town of Jacobabad. We were limited to what we had. We also had our Marine colleagues that were off the Peleliu, and they were providing air support with H-53s and C-130s, and they became vital later on when we were running out of water. They ended up shipping in bottled water, MREs, and sustaining us for a period of time until we could get the backhaul of logistics infrastructure to sustain our force. So bottom line is, my job was ensuring we had the CSAR mission in place, but then Maslow's hierarchy of needs was trying to keep everybody healthy enough to be able to do the mission.
I would like to circle back to the events on around, it was around the 10th of October when Karzai and the placement and the teams, you're working with the Jasodov North out of Uzbekistan, Matt. I'd like for you to talk about the false report that we had ginned up an operation for. There was a military coup. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. There was, as General Kingsley alluded to, more than a few brushes with fear factor as far as not specifically Al-Qaeda, but Jamaat Islamiyah. And we had a lot of SIGINT to suggest that they were setting up something to come after us. So we'd gotten one of those spurious, top secret, super duper reports that there'd been a coup in Pakistan and they'd overthrown Musharraf and they were headed our way with torches and pitchforks. So we were scurrying around the sweat camp, stacking the equipment and putting thermite on it, getting ready to go. And fortunately, cooler minds prevailed, and we decided to, check back, and they rescinded the report. And, we did have some gunfire at the towers, and I think a few of the Pakistani guard force did get killed. But yeah, we definitely had more than one brush with packing it up and all heading out of town. When it comes to the Karzai story, there's been a lot of books written about that. We kind of had a neat tangential role in that. We helped get him out of Dodge. And it was one of those bizarre moments. I'm sure it'd be a great movie moment where, General Kingsley didn't exactly keep Air Marshal Tanweer in the loop as far as what we're actually doing there. It was, CSAR, he was training. Meanwhile, we're flying in country every night. And so we had exfilled Hamid Karzai and 9 of his closest friends, all tribal elders, plucked him out of the mountains of Tarin Kot as the Taliban closed in to finish him off, and brought him back to Jacobabad, where we were going to set him up at an ISO facility and put him in with the first ODA that had been assigned to the south. Remember, the first 4 were up in the north, run out of Uzbekistan, and there were 2 run out of the south, Texas 1-2 and Texas 1-5. And so, my job from General Kingsley is like, hey, figure out a way to get Karzai and all his cats off the C-130 and into the ISO facility, and don't let Air Marshal Tanweer figure it out. So I'm backing a stolen school bus on NVGs down the runway into the back of a MC-130 and offloading him into the school bus, drive right past the Air Commodore's house and then to the ISO facility and shooing them all in. And then, actively lying about the next day. But it was, that's where we put them into isolation with an ODA and those who shall not be named. And, once we had them all set up, we took them back in, and then we did the same for Gulaga Sharzai, who was part of Texas 1-5, and millions of stories have been written about that. But I'll kick it over to General Kingsley and some of his perspectives on that.
Yes, thank you, General Kingsley.
Yeah, just a small point on that one is, again, I'm having a relationship with General Tanweer in the way of a daily tea, or he would come over to our hangar and want to talk about fires around the airfield, for example. We had a lot of issues with airplanes punching out flares on short final, and it was causing major fires around the airfield. So bottom line, we were dealing with all kinds of issues. There was a day that Captain Atkins at the time came back to me and said, hey, these guys are not taking these MREs very well. They need something else to eat. So I actually went to General Tanweer and I said, hey, how about we get some of your local food? They have this curry rice type of meal out of the town of Jacobabad. So it was really good for him to share what they have. And they came back to us and said, yeah, well, so the next day I get these plates of this rice dish from Jacobabad, and I literally give it to Matt Atkins and Steve Hadley, and they walk it over and they're feeding Karzai with better food for them, health-wise, rather than MREs that will stop them up. So, small story.
Thank you, General Kingsley. Chief Smith, do you have anything to add to that?
The only things I'll say is that, from the 8th to the 19th, all the way up to the Karzai piece of it, life, and this is a point for anybody going in and, and reflecting, as you'll all reflect, is life went from rudimentary to a period of denial where it seemed like it wasn't going to get better, to where the cavalry comes and does all that. And then along the way, there were these, on the 8th, when the air war started, I saw Pete LaHue made a comment about kiln fires, right? Setting off of our flare dispensers, as the Jacobobodites make bricks, right, in these kilns. And that's how so you have all these fires that are around the airfield that our sensors were hinging off of, and you couldn't tell if it was a missile or a RPG or this, so you'd punch flares. And then up to the hit night on October 19th, which was probably, in my opinion, still today, one of the most stressful and confusing yet complex nights of our life. We had several of our assets that had sustained battle damage that we weren't sure were coming to us or not. We had multiple objectives going. We had several U.S. members trapped under a helicopter that had browned out, right, and rolled over. So we're going back and forth. We had multiple events happening. I remember Captain Mike Flatten, which we would later call the mayor of Kandahar, as he went in and opened up Kandahar Airfield as a special tactics officer, and Major Eric Ray, now retired Colonel Eric Ray, as our special tactics. Those guys were loading up Reds kits and extraction gears back and forth. We called them back and put them on 7 different airplanes and helicopters to determine the best way to get some of our wounded, ill, and injured out. And it was just an incredible time. But through each one of these events, we got a little bit smarter. And, as we talk about building experience, as we started moving forward, we started to expect the unexpected a lot more. And I think in the long run, and Matt Atkins does himself he downplays his role here, as kind of Karzai's right-hand guy. The amount of bugs and infections and some of the things that they had to deal with Karzai and his team to get them healthy and resilient is nothing short of miraculous in a lot of ways. So the intel, medical, and logistics support we provided to them really set conditions for the first half of what we would know as enduring freedom. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Chief Smith. General Kingsley, would you like any parting thoughts on that prior to
Yeah, just a couple points. First of all, our maintainers and logistics personnel were just top notch. And on hit night, as Chief Smith was alluding to, we did have an MH-47 that came in that was missing one of its landing gear. So you might imagine that, okay, so how are you going to land this thing when it doesn't have a wheel attached anymore? So one of our maintainers, a guy named Glenn Marr, he ended up putting pallets underneath the 47 at night. It's 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and he's underneath the 47 inserting pallets. It crunches down, he inserts some more, crunches down some more. Eventually he got the MH-47 to be level and save the airplane and crew. And I think that, my hat's off to him on that job. The other thing that we had is there was a rollover of an MH-60, and unfortunately some Rangers were killed and injured in that rollover. So we ended up becoming an evac site for that crash. So Matt Atkins actually had to find some body bags in a hurry. I think the STS, if I'm not mistaken, actually had a couple extra ones. We had the team sergeant that was with them, and we did the most respectful thing we could at the time. We weren't prepared for that, but we made do and we adapted and overcame.
Thank you, General Kingsley. There's a lot. The payload community also, we suffered losses, some inflicted. The operations were challenging at working at high altitude. Could you briefly explain the circumstances of where we're at? And I'll transition that over to Captain Atkins at the time, Colonel Atkins' perspective of Knife 03 and 04 on the mountaintop in Afghanistan.
Sure. Obviously, we were operating our Pavlos in and out of Afghanistan. So our Pavlos were given a mission to, and our crews were given a mission to rescue a special forces soldier that was needing to be evacuated. So Karsi Combat was bad weather at the time, so we were going to fly north of Kabul from Jacobabad. Very, very long mission. Still was bad weather. And just the heroism of these crews, I would say the two flight leads, and there was Frank Lazar in lead, and you had Mike Holder in Shock 2, and then the mission commander was Pete LeHue. Well, unfortunately, the lead airplane lost its radar, and it was unable to keep itself going, but they lost contact with Shock 2. Ended up impacting the ground, and Pete LeHue was on the airplane along with the other crew members. Nobody, there was some injuries, but in essence, they were able to evacuate the airplane. And long story short, there was the other airplane was able to go in, rescue that crew, and pull them out. A very, very harrowing mission. I would say Garshab was, he was the DISO at the time, and he was very instrumental in talking to the locals as they were interacting with the locals. But in essence, a very, very trying mission, but successful. We were able to get that crew back from Afghanistan.
Thank you, General Kingsley, for that. Matt, at the time, also around the 4th of November, we had a lot going on 2 days after that. And tell us a little bit about the evacuation of Hamak Karzai.
Yeah, Randy. Well, I think General Kingsley, talked about Knife 04, really was sort of a linchpin for us. And after that, the operations came fast and furious with almost nightly infills and exfills, CASEVACs, leading all the way up to the events of early December, and ultimately making Karzai the prime minister. So we had gone in and gotten him out of a bad situation in Tarankot, and we put him in isolation and married him up with Jason Amarine and his team from the ODA, and put him back in. And then the next chapter of our JSOAC's history was supporting Karzai and Sharzai, as Karzai came from the north of Kandahar and Sharzai from the south. And it was daily flights in to take them ammunition, bring additional ODAs or resources. I usually had to fly along to do a quick, fireside debrief, as well as, just hand them reams of classified. That really still screws me up on my polygraphs. And then again, General Kingsley said, hey, Matt, you can handle all these prisoners or whatever. So I had to build a little Connex farm down in the ammo bunkers in order to deal with all the prisoners that we were taking off the battlefield as well. So it just really kicked off a frantic time, and really remarkable how we became the Swiss Army knife JSOAC as far as the amount of crazy things that we were being asked to do on a daily basis. But ultimately, keeping those two players in action and the fall of Kandahar was a really big, I could say, pivotal point in the war. And it kind of all wrapped up with us getting to take Karzai up and make him the president. It was a really remarkable phase of the operation. And I know Greg has some insights on that from his catbird seat as running the JOC too.
I'll just say that that really my part culminated when, in my opinion, when the JOC was up and running, and some of those pieces leading up to Halloween. And without guys like Mickey Galuzzo and Brett Sanders and Dale Reynolds, all great experienced guys that were running kind of combat ops and combat plans 24 hours a day. They were really the linchpins that kind of started to tie the campaign together at that point. But, you know, what we had learned the most is this was a new kind of conflict, and we really established a battle rhythm that would become kind of TTP and standard operating procedures for how not to do things in the first 72 hours, especially when building 10 cities, but also really how to pull nebulous information, synchronize it, and get it to the commander and the J2 folks so they could start the intelligence and the operations cycle. This was really our first, and you've got to place it in time context of really understanding the ops intel cycles that really we refined really starting at that moment. So I was blessed to be part of it. I thought I was cursed at the time, but looking back, I was blessed because it really paved the way for a lot of the way I think today. So back over to General Kingsley.
So one time I'm on a flight across to do an infill to support, I think it was Karzai, but not too sure. And we were flying in a two-ship, and one of the airplanes has engine failure. So we ended up landing at Quetta Airfield. And Quetta is not one of those locations that you want to stay at, kind of the home of Al-Qaeda, if you will. So naturally, I had Matt Atkins on the back there, and I asked him to deploy and go talk to the locals at the airfield when we landed there unannounced. And let me ask Matt, what did they say to you when you walked off the ramp and to go talk to them about these 53s that are sitting on their ramp?
Well, to be fair, Colonel Kingsley had to abandon me. So we transloaded all the ODA into the working aircraft, and they took off and flew a single ship to do the infill, and it was to tactipole in support of Karzai. And actually, that's when we brought his nephew out who'd been shot. But so as I see the one working helicopter with my boss fly off in the distance, about a battalion of Pakistani military police surround the helicopter. And, you know, I had really detailed instructions from General Kingsley. He's like, hey, don't F it up and don't let them on. So, you know, they had us all surrounded and they're pointing guns at us. I'm like, I've seen this movie before. But out of the crowd comes Air Marshal Tanweer. And I'm like, oh, my God, I actually know this dude. So we drank about 37 cups of green tea, and he informed me that because we had crashed on the main runway of the international airport. So we kind of, fortunately, they don't fly at night. I remember thinking, man, Pakistani prison is not where I want to end up. So, but it's one of those maintenance miracles is back in Jacobabad, they scrambled all the maintenance kids onto a C-130, landed it next to us, put the thing together with duct tape and baling wire, and actually got one of the engines running. And it's one of those surreal moments, you know, it's going and everybody's climbing back on the C-130 and Sean Borland was the pilot. And Sean looks at me, he's like, you're getting on with us, right? To fly back? And I'm like, ooh, yeah, sure. So sure enough, we did a rolling taxi down the main runway. And just as the sun's coming up, we got about 8.5 feet off the ground and went back to Jacobabad. But yeah, it was absolutely one of those Air Marshal Tanweer moments. And but the mission was successful and got the helicopter back, and you know, we're all here on Zoom to talk about it. So it was a pretty remarkable episode.
Thank you, Colonel Atkins. I just wanted to hit one particular area. I'm going to pose this question to General Kingsley. Let's talk about the daylight CASEVAC of Texas 1-2, the circumstances for a mass medevac. Something that we rarely practice, but it was an unfortunate event. We didn't know at the time it was friendly fire or we were under fire, but several people, particularly that were involved or attached to Texas 1-2, were seriously injured. General Kingsley, would you like to talk to that?
The bottom line is, and Matt had alluded to this, is we were supporting Karzai. And supporting Karzai and the special forces. So in essence, for us to do that, we had to do a lot of remarkable things, including flying a daylight mission across Kandahar from Jacobabad all the way up to the site where the friendly fire took place. It was a 2,000-pound JDAM, I think, right. That landed on their position. So a lot of heroics that day by the air crews, by the people on the ground, just the maintainers, the C-130s, just going above and beyond to be able to save American lives and Afghan lives, by the way. Some of Karzai's tribe, his tribal elders were also injured. And so at the end of the day, after all this was done and we recovered and saved as many lives as we could, we were given a battle flag by Karzai, and it was signed. That battle flag now is displayed proudly in the 20th SOS.
I just wanted to note that General Kingsley, you mentioned Pete LaHue.
Yes.
He's watching, and he's been adding his commentary throughout. So you've definitely got some other brothers watching and participating.
A lot of people that were there, we will remember each other for a very long time. And now I'm really proud of the fact that people like Chief Smith, who just was phenomenal. And if you want to just share a little bit about your experience upon your departure there, and what led to your departure.
Well, I'd prefer not to, but since you brought it up, no. In all seriousness, you know, I had a bit of a nicotine addiction as well, right? So as we're working 20-hour days, so we're smoking and dipping, and any place you can get nicotine, you do it. On the night of October 16th, we infilled real quick, and we were out at what would become the FARP site, and there was a truck, a Hilux, that had opened fire with a dish gun on the back, and just, you know, kind of rounds up the hill. Of course, we think it's Al-Qaeda. Everything's Al-Qaeda at the time, right? But as I go to jump back on the helicopter, I ran right into the tail gun mount, right? And Jens Hansen was the tail gunner. I'll still never forget that little son of a gun. And I ran in and hit my leg on the tail mount. A couple nights later, after hitting that, I think I probably smoked 2 packs of cigarettes and 2 cans of dip. And so they're like, that's going to kill you. But long story short on that is, the SEALs were giving me grief for smoking constantly. So I went to go for a run with them, and I made it about 1/16 of a mile and almost passed out. So instead of doing my bottled water shower, I decided to go back in and check the morning sipper net. And as I walked in, the flight doc was there and saw the bruises on my leg. And he said, hey, come here. That doesn't look right. So they looked at it, medevaced me. I was Enduring Freedom's 3rd medevac. That's a great claim to fame, right? But they bounced me down to Muscat, and then over to Ali Salim, and then finally to Bahrain. Now, when I got to Bahrain, I hadn't shaved in a month, hadn't brushed my hair, carried my guns, and I walk into the Bahraini Defense Force Hospital with an M4 and my uniform on. It's late October 2001. That whole place stops. So I walked back outside, took everything off, stripped down to my shorts and my boots, walked back in. Long story long is they go, hey, I think you have leukemia. And I'm like, what? Right? Well, it turns out acute exposure to microwave radiation, which we did not know at the time, but the antenna fields is not a good place to smoke or set up jocks or anything else along those lines. So lo and behold, I became the first of I'm sure a series of cancer clusters associated with setting up the early days of OEF. So a year of chemo later, and here I am. So life is good.
Chief Smith, I really appreciate that. That's an amazing way to end this. Panel, this brings us to the conclusion of topic 1 of SOF Stories Live, the aftermath of 9/11. The Global SOF Foundation wishes to extend heartfelt thanks to you as our special guest panel for this historic event and for candidly sharing your most personal experiences with our viewers, especially now in light of the anniversary of 9/11. For the viewers, thank you for participating in this event. Please join us in October as our new guest panel shares their recollections of events of October of 1993, topic 2, the Battle of Mogadishu. We're looking forward to having you again. Until then, I'm Randy Anderson. Good afternoon, and God bless America.